In 2026, the African Union declared this the beginning of a decade of reparations, a 10-year call to confront one of the longest unaddressed injustices in human history. From the shores of Ghana to the streets of St. Paul, from the first demand made the day after the Emancipation Proclamation to the task forces convening across American cities today, the call for reparations has never been about a check. It has been about reckoning. My recent album and book release, Negritude, The Names They Tried to Silence, provided insight on what that reckoning looks like. The writings are an exploration of the legacy of enslavement and Jim Crow that still shapes wealth and health, an echoing opportunity in our primary communities, and that includes the voices of our scholars, activists, elders, and everyday people who refuse to let this conversation be buried by time. As Lyndon Johnson once said, you do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him. Bring him up to the starting line of a race and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Negritude, The Names They Try to Silence spoken word album and book, highlights the Where Are the Reparations poetic number as an unflinching critique of the long-standing injustice Black people have faced, framed through the lens of the Negritude movement's emphasis on reclaiming Black dignity and history. It delves deep into the historical context of slavery, colonialism, and the ongoing repercussions while directly confronting the question of reparations for Black communities. The spoken word piece begins by rejecting empty gestures like apologies or the toppling of statues that fail to confront the deeper systemic wounds inflicted by slavery and colonialism. The demands for real redress are addressed, a reckoning that goes beyond symbolic gestures that is tangible and rooted in the truth of stolen labor and wealth. Drawing on historical examples from the United States and Haiti, the spoken word piece critiques the glaring hypocrisy of Western nations that built their prosperity on the backs of enslaved Africans but never acknowledged their true debt. In particular, references figures such as George Washington to Saint Louverture and Frederick Douglass to illustrate how the demands for justice have been consistently ignored or marginalized. Washington's supposedly wooden teeth are a poignant metaphor for the hidden grotesque realities of exploitation that were built into the foundations of freedom in the United States. Similarly, the spoken word production raises the haunting question, where is the payment for the pain and labor that sustained these empires? Where are the reparations? Reparations are not just asking about financial compensation. It's asking for historical reckoning, societal healing, and the dismantling of the systems that continue to perpetuate the legacies of colonial exploitation. From a cultural perspective, reparations involve restoring what was taken and suppressed culturally, such as language, spirituality, land, art, and indigenous knowledge systems, the right to reclaiming and restoring our identity and heritage. The heart of cultural justice is often overlooked in reparations conversations, but it is just as vital as financial or political restitution. For instance, cultural genocide, where colonization and slavery erased or devalued African cultures, languages, and worldviews. There's also the repatriation of artifacts, where there are countless African artifacts sitting in European museums acquired through theft or coercion. And then there's also reviving cultural identity. It is my belief that reparations should include supporting African languages, educational systems, traditional knowledge, and cultural institutions. But what does cultural restitution look like in practice? Cultural restitution is the process of returning stolen, looted, or suppressed cultural property, knowledge, and identity to the people and communities it was taken from. It also includes restoring the dignity of cultures that were erased, distorted, or vilified under colonial and racist systems. Historically, reparations are fundamentally rooted in the recognition of historical injustices. This includes the transatlantic slave trade, colonial exploitation, systemic racism, and apartheid. Forcibly, over 12 million Africans were taken to the Americas via the transatlantic slave trade. It was an inopportune time where families, communities, and cultures were destroyed. This led to the wealth of many Western nations being built on the exploitation. Then there's colonialism. At the Berlin Conference between 1884 and 1885, European powers carved up Africa, where they imposed foreign rule, plundered resources, and suppressed indigenous institutions. During the apartheid and segregation period, the institutionalized racial oppression in South Africa, the United States, and elsewhere had long-term effects on social and economic mobility. When we talk about the fundamentally rooted effects of reparations and its recognition of historical injustices, these systems deprived African nations and descendants of African people of their wealth, autonomy, and their future. Racial and legal segregation, which even today still exists. Post-colonial systems of inequality, where even after independence, many African and Caribbean nations are still left with weak economies, debt traps, and dependent trade systems. The diaspora discrimination, where in the Americas and Europe, people of African descent have faced segregation, redlining, discriminatory policing, and underfunded schools, all affecting wealth accumulation and social mobility. Reparations are not a new or radical concept. In fact, there are multiple historical examples of states or institutions that offered restitution for mass injustice, such as the Holocaust reparations. Post-World War II, Germany agreed to pay reparations to Jewish Holocaust survivors and the State of Israel. Payments that amount billions of dollars over decades, including pensions, health care, and restitution for stolen property, plus the acknowledgement of guilt, supported survivor dignity, and that helped Israel's early development. There's also the Japanese-American internment within the U.S. During World War II, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned in camps. In 1988, the U.S. government formally apologized and paid $20,000 to each surviving internee through the Civil Liberties Act, a move that significantly recognized that systemic racial injustice had occurred and required restitution. There's also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that exists in South Africa. After apartheid ended, the TRC offered victims a platform to share their stories and seek redress. Although financial reparations were limited, the process emphasized truth-telling and societal healing. And yes, there were challenges. Many argue the financial and institutional support fell short, highlighting the need for stronger implementation. Where Are the Reparations also examines the broader global context, referencing Barbados' decision to remove the Queen and the Caribbean nations' ongoing demands for reparations. Throughout the literate and recorded content, I underscore that the consequences of colonialism aren't just historical. They are present and ongoing, affecting Black communities worldwide. The recording's message critiques the absurdity of the continued denial of reparations by pointing out the contrast between the lavish wealth of colonial powers and the lasting legacies of Black suffering. The repeated question, where are the reparations, becomes a powerful refrain throughout the spoken word recordings, underscoring the frustration of pain of being denied recognition for centuries of injustice. It also brings attention to pivotal historical moments such as the Red Summer of 1919 and the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, when black communities were violently attacked and then denied compensation or justice. The recording's criticism extends to how the struggle for reparation has been repeatedly undermined or dismissed, turning figures like Harriet Tubman, who fought to free enslaved people, into a symbol of betrayal as she died in poverty without the recognition or reparations she deserved. Socially, reparations are about healing wounds, acknowledging harm, and promoting justice and reconciliation across communities. Many of the inequalities faced by African nations and people of African descent today are not accidental or recent. They are the result of centuries of deliberate marginalization. For instance, intergenerational trauma, where the effects of historical injustices persist through inherited trauma, systemic inequalities, and disrupted family and cultural struggles. There's also racial disparities. In today's society, the access to education, healthcare, justice, and wealth is still unequal in many parts of the world due to past oppression. There's also the lack of recognition and apology. Symbolic gestures such as public apologies and truth commissions are crucial to restoring dignity and rewriting historical narratives. Whereas economic reparations focuses on the material losses suffered and the current inequalities rooted in centuries of exploitation, there are some key areas of pertinence to consider, such as wealth transfer and underdevelopment, where colonizers extracted vast wealth from African lands while stunting local economic development. There's also global inequality. Modern economic disparities such as debt dependency and unfair trade practices are legacies of colonial economic systems. Reparations might look like direct payments or financial compensation, debt cancellation, technology transfer or development aid, as well as investment in healthcare, education, and infrastructure. However, it is to be importantly noted that reparations are not just about money. They're about acknowledgement of harm, restoration of dignity and wealth, and structural change to prevent future injustices. The takeaway from this piece is that not all reparations come in cash. Some come in verse, in memory, in truth-telling. Where are the reparations piece is a reclamation of truth as repayment and resistance. The global references from the U.S. to the Caribbean speak to the Negritude's call for unity among all African-descended people and suggest that the struggle for reparations is not just an American issue, but a global one that connects the African diaspora in a shared fight for justice.
Where are the reparations? Not the empty apologies, not the statues pulled down at midnight, but the redress, the reckoning, the check cut from the vault of colonial profit. The age of revolution, 1776, liberty rang in Philadelphia, while my ancestors picked cotton in North Carolina. Not one word in the Constitution for the broken backs that built it. They toasted freedom.
The final verses of the piece itself call for more than just monetary compensation. It calls for land, healing, truth, equity, and power, rejecting the notion of charity or pity. This reflects the Negritude movement's insistence that Black people are not objects of sympathy, but rather are deserving of justice, agency, and dignity. There is a demanded call for the rewriting of history, A restructuring of a society that acknowledges Black people's contributions and sacrifices, and the eradication of the systems of oppression that continue to extract from Black lives.
Then they shot him, not just with bullets, but silence. Malcolm X, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Still, we carry the weight till today. Well, present day, there's a global reckoning. Now Barbados removes the Queen, and the Caribbean nations draft reparation claims. The Crown sips tea while the descendants of slaves drink rust from poison pipes. In the US, they study it, debate it, as if unpaid labor is still unpaid because it's complicated, as if generations of redlining, sterilization, stolen wealth, and schools and screaming from the spreadsheets. So here's our protest, our cry to the ancestors. Where are the reparations? Not just in dollars, but in land, in healing, in truth, in the rewriting of history books. In equity, not charity. In power, not pity. You can't bury injustice beneath time. You can't drown pain in patriotism. You can't whitewash what was built on Black backs. We are not asking, we are calling. We are not begging, we are billing. Where are the reparations?
The closing lines, we are not asking, we are calling. We are not begging, we are billing, deliver a final resolute message. Black people are no longer begging for justice, but demanding what is owed. This is not a plea for charity. It is a claim for rightful reparations. The enslavement of African people built the wealth of nations. Jim Crow locked that wealth out of our hands for another century and the decades since then. They have been a masterclass in pretending that the playing field has been leveled. It didn't. The numbers don't lie. The health disparities don't lie. The housing gaps, the education gaps, the policing gaps, they all trace back to the same root. Reparations is not a handout. It is not charity. It is a debt that was never paid. And from the halls of the United Nations to the front porches of our own communities, people are finally saying, the bill is due. Where are the reparations?
Where are the reparations?